Good morning, gentlemen. First of all, I would like to welcome you all to today's conference. And I'm very pleased to see many of you here from different backgrounds, presenting cross-section from the construction industry, including consultants, contractors, suppliers, planners, academics, and government bodies. The Middle East has traditionally been a very good market for the construction industry and will continue to be so. There are a number of reasons for this. First of all, the natural resources of the region enables the funding of many development projects. Of course, the steady increase of the population here requiring improved infrastructure. The region's strategic location between the west and the east, the north and the south, also make it a very attractive part of the world for businesses. Of course, the leadership vision of the region here to improve and diversify and development is a major driver for development. So it's really fortunate to be in this part of the world here, working on a very challenging, projects for engineers to do what they enjoy most, doing planning, designing, building, and being involved in building modern history of the region. There are many challenging projects that take place in this part of the world, which is advancing the construction industry practices in many respects. So we add value to the communities, and we, at the same time, achieve our personal and professional objectives. I'm sorry, I've just noticed a lady here. Earlier, I was just saying, good morning, gentlemen, so welcome, So I wish you all a very enjoyable conference for today and tomorrow. Our first session will be a panel discussion, and in this discussion we will talk about the national vision and development plans for Kuwait, opportunities and challenges that such plans will bring to the construction industry. Our panelist today was supposed to be Dr. Riyad Faraz, but unfortunately he's not able to make it, today. We have engineer Walid Azzi. Would you like to join us on the floor, please? And we have Dr. Saleh Yaseen, professor of engineering from the University of Kuwait. If you'd like to join us, please. Engineer Walid Azzi is a principal engineer working at SHH. He is responsible for developing business, delivering design and management solutions. Example projects in which he involved include Sheikh Jabal Ahmed Al Sabah Causeway. While working with McDonald UAE, he worked on landmark steel arch bridges at Raha Beach. He also worked in the UK on large road and rail projects. Engineer Walid holds a BSc in civil engineering and MSc in structural engineering. He received his education in the UK, and he's a chartered member of the Institution of Civil Engineers. I'm going to ask Dr. Saleh to introduce himself because I haven't received your bibliography. So if you please tell us a few words about yourself.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Due to short notice, that's what happened, but I'm very glad that I will just say a few notes. I'm a faculty member at Kuwait University. My specialty in urban transport planning, safety, traffic management, anything to do with urban transportation. My first job was a site engineer with Kuwait Oil Company. Then I joined Kuwait University in a scholarship return. I spent many years during the last, I say 25 years, as a consultant and advisor to Ministry of Interior, the General Traffic Department, also a consultant for many years for Kuwait Public Transport Company. I gave many training courses to Kuwait municipality, engineers, Ministry of Public Works. I was for 7 years one of the managerial post in the Kuwait construction project after liberation from 1991 to 1998. I was for 7 years Assistant Secretary for Educational Facilities at Ministry of Education in Kuwait, and I have some experience in the private sector, but not into designing bridges and things. I prepare information for designing bridges and highways. So I think that's in short what I do. I have a lot of interest, and my passion is transportation, I say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to the conference. Okay. Okay, before we start the discussions, I would like to share with you some facts and figures about Kuwait. Crude oil reserves is about 10% of the world. Oil accounts for nearly 95% of government income. Budget surplus is 30% of GDP. There's a strong need to diversify its economy. 60% of the Kuwaiti population is under 24 years old. 85% of Kuwait is employed by government. Now, given these facts, the leadership have established a vision for 2035, which consists of a series of 5 years development plans. The focus of these plans is to rebuild, and it is rebuild because in the 60s and 70s, probably 80s as well, Kuwait was one of the leading countries in the region as a financial and trade center. So the focus of the vision also is to diversify economy away from being just dependent on oil. Emphasis will be on telecommunication, transportation, real estate, education, and health. The vision also calls for creating new jobs and creating long-term, sustainable, prosperous economy. Now, a few years ago, the Kuwait Development Plan 2010-2015 was established, and at a cost of $130 billion. Unfortunately, it faced numerous delays, much less spent on 15% 2010 to 2011, 2013-14 on 15%. However, things are getting much better. 2014 seeing faster implementation of projects. There's been some delays to making decisions and procurement. Some of the affected projects include Silk City, metro system, hospitals, and the plan did not meet its target in terms of increasing private sector contribution, and oil still dominates the economy. A new plan materialized recently, and it's renewed hopes and commitment to the projects that have been done. This includes the metro rail projects, terminal Kuwait, media city, and the list goes on, which is very positive. Now, looking at the global economy and the oil prices and how it's affecting the region here, Kuwait is considered one of the most resilient countries to ride the storm of low prices. It's got low budget break-even price for oil, huge fiscal reserves, And so the priority is to continue with the development. Okay, given this background, to the environment in Kuwait, there's a few challenges that faces everybody really, in terms of government, the construction industry, in order to meet these plans. And of course, transport is a major part of these plans. Could I ask you to comment, Dr. Saleh, on how the highway has been in the past and how it's going to be affected in terms of development in the future?
If you allow me, I talk for a few minutes, not more than 10 minutes, to see how we started in developing the highway network in Kuwait and where we're going. And you probably know more where we're going in terms of project, but where we go in terms of functionality, the adaptation, integration of all the transport system. When I was a student in the late 70s, I was in one of my trips back to the States from home. I sat next to a gentleman and we had this conversation, what do you do? He said, I am from the California Highway Department of Transportation. And he was here designing, in the task of designing the Kuwait highway or freeway system. So I wasn't into really that much of transportation, but we had this nice conversation. Many years later, I got my PhD and came back with a degree in transportation planning and management, forecasting, traffic analysis. And I was invited after coming back a few months at the Kuwait Engineering Society to give a talk about transportation system in general in Kuwait. I've noticed there was something wrong, The freeway system, they were Al-Fahil, which have different names now. There were 3 major freeways coming in the cities. But I've noticed there was something wrong. It was nice for the traffic coming from far distance away, as you know, accessibility and mobility. But there was something wrong what happened between adjacent neighborhoods in Kuwait. They were all cut off from each other. There was a huge mix between local traffic and long distance traffic. And to the days, this is really what we are suffering from. And at that time, there was 2 gentlemen sitting. I didn't know them very well, but one of them, the Assistant Secretary for Highways or Road Design in the Ministry of Public Works, and the other gentleman was Assistant Secretary in the municipality. And this discussion between me and happened, I said, this is really a big mistake. There should have been some more thought in constructing and designing those freeways, Somehow we have to respect the function of a road. Is it mobility? Is it accessibility? And, the rest of functionality of the highways. Well, they didn't like that conversation. A couple of years ago, we met again to the same gentleman. So I brought to their attention the same thing after we saw so many attempts by the traffic department and the highway and the Ministry of Public Works. They've been trying their best to overcome all these shortcomings which were already built in the highway network. So you will see like many examples. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to prepare a nice presentation with photos. There was so many weaving sections in every freeway in Kuwait. My students went and we did some study to see if the roads meet the Highway Department of Transportation, the Highway Capacity Manual, which gives some good specs to what you do, how you design those roads, some requirements. Well, one of them, just to bring to your attention, says there should be at least from 3 to 5 miles between one intersection to another intersection. Where my students, we found that every 300 meters, there is either an exit or entrance on the 5th Ring Road. And I think the same thing goes with all other roads. So we have so many, our roads became continuous weaving sections. Now you see in some location, again, the Ministry of Public Works trying to separate all these movements from each other. They did their best, but what they do, they take the problem from this place, shift it to another location. And I think if I want to deal with the congestion in Kuwait, really I have to review all this. Then that discussion came, I said, why didn't you do that? They said, you were right. We chose the cheapest offer, and that was very expensive to have either depressed highways or elevated highways when you come to highly congested urban areas. This is what we are suffering from the current highway. And I hope in the future, these things will be avoided. But luckily, those new roads, I think from mostly the big bridges and outside the city, but I think urbanization will reach all these places where we think now we are building roads in the desert. One other thing, the developments now towards more of mass transit, more metro, some other competing functions, and I think Kuwait should follow all these international trends like Dubai and all these places. You build the major freeway system, then you have to also complement it with some sort of advanced public transport. At this time, I don't know how we can expand on our freeway system in Kuwait. I'm not the fan of having 2 layers or 3 layers of highways in the corridors, main corridors in Kuwait. This is actually what's happening. We must think seriously into other modal transport, mass transit, and so on. Nevertheless, we need still a lot of bridges and freeways, given that we avoid what's happening. We must. I feel sometimes really the capacity and future forecasting did not build into the designing of the current, or were not considered seriously in designing those roads. In Kuwait right now, we have between 120 to 150,000 new cars registered in the country. Okay? I don't know how much of this goes into the current or the future roads, but definitely we must expand, build more roads, separate. I mean, the one thing I really preach in the new roads, to separate the local and the longer traffic. We should not do what we did in the past, avoid these things. I would be willing to answer any other question besides this, my really comments.
Okay. I'd just like to comment. I think the trend now in the Middle East is to go towards integrated transport system and reducing congestion, because if we keep building roads, we increase the volume of traffic. The more roads we have, the more. Of course, you still need roads, but within integrated transport system, for the country. Engineer Walid, would you like to add any comments?
Yeah, I will add a few other ones. I think also we should be more aware of the environmental sides of building roads. Currently, if you, let's say, compare Dubai roads to Kuwait roads, Kuwait roads, main roads, come closely to residential neighborhoods, too close, sometimes not even farther than 20 meters. That's the distance between the first house to the edge of the road. That's too low, too short for environmental consideration, basically air pollution, which our society becoming much more aware of it now than previously. I know there are some contradictions, but still in Kuwait, the most expensive house, you can find it on 4th Ring Road or somewhere, or close to that, and you go inside, it gets cheaper. I know, I did some studies where you come closer to the road, you get the least expensive house. these things must really seriously. Also, there's nothing presented or provided for cyclists, for pedestrians, almost like we are neglecting them or telling them we will not allow you to get on our roads. No cyclists will be allowed on the road. I mean, we are discouraging what everybody else is going towards, as you just mentioned, integrated, community-friendly, and so on. Some people call the roads the black monsters, okay? But we still need black monsters.
Engineer Walid, would you like to add some comments?
Yes, sure. I'll actually continue on from the point that you mentioned, Nidal, just now, and from the point that Dr. Saleh finished with, and that's the integrated transport. And I'm, again, one of the big fans of that. Dr. Saleh, you mentioned on more than one occasion the UAE and Dubai and the model, how it operated. And I'll just give an example that I use regularly, which is when my final destination is Abu Dhabi, sometimes I go to Dubai and I use a combination between the metro and the bus, and I timed it, and it took me normally 40 minutes more than what a taxi would have, but about 10% the cost. So I saved 90% on the cost of a taxi by just adding about 40 minutes to the journey between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And that's fascinating, I felt. Every time, my very first trip on the Dubai metro was just to see it, saw the tourists, but then it was crowded, and every time I used it, it was very crowded, regardless of what time of the day it was, which is a big sign that it does work. Now, we're not going to talk about Dubai now, it's just to emphasize the point that you mentioned, Dr. Saleh, and what you finished with, Nidal. Going back to your first question, Nidal, about the challenges that we're facing, and I think the answer lies very much within the question, the way you asked it. And you said the challenges that the government and construction professionals face, which is absolutely true. And one thing I have noticed throughout previous experiences on more than one procurement method where I was involved in projects, is that the more we engage all parties from early days, then the better value you get at the end of the contract, and by far. Now, when I was preparing for this discussion, for this event, I looked at some figures, and what I have noticed, for example, is that between 2009 and 2013, for that 5 years, Kuwait spent $50 billion on projects, generally. That's about 10 per year, and about 20% of that was on transportation. Now, for the next 5 years, between 2014 and 18, that's going to more than double. It will be multiplied by a factor of 2.2, and the ratio of the transportation is going to increase. Now, all that is very good news for consultancies and for contractors. But one thing that I noticed, and I'm not sure if it is changing, is the ratio between private and public funding. What I have seen is that the public was funding more than 90% of those projects, while the private sector was funding less than 10%. Now, that brings, I'm linking this to the statement I made a little bit earlier about engaging all construction professionals from the bottom of the chain to the very, very top. And that has to be driven by the very top, indeed. One thing that I have noticed, I mean, it's a common fact, and I've noticed it in many, many projects I was involved in where traditional contracts have been used, where the process goes in a sequential way. The client that appoints the consultant who would do all the feasibility studies and then all the stages of the designs, and then the contract is brought on board with only one vision, and that is to construct what they have been contracted to do, finish their maintenance liability period, and then disappear, and then move on to do something different. Now, that is fine in principle, and it does work, but when you start looking at alternative ways, either design and build, but even more than that, all sorts of longer-term arrangement like DBFOs, all sorts of public-private partnership, which I know that was the topic of discussion yesterday. I missed yesterday's event, so I'm sure that it was discussed in depth. But in my previous experience, all projects that had that incredibly raised the value, but also the efficiency. So you would see in one room people sitting, having only one vision, and that is not just to design and construct the road for now, but also how it will operate for the next 50 years. And they would be looking at everything, all from stakeholder liaison, from stakeholder management to the operation of that network. And I think that this is something that perhaps our role as consultants is to try to raise the profile of what else could be done other than the traditional methods. I'm not an expert, by all means, in public-private partnerships, but in my experience, I have very, very positive opinions about it. And I think that this is something that, I'm aware that Kuwait has started that process in the education and in the healthcare, so they are engaging with specialist consultants and with consortia to look at the longer term, but I'm not so sure that it's happening in the transportation sector, in roads and bridges construction. To my knowledge, there are no toll roads, for example, in
They're
Kuwait.
talking about involving private sector in the development of the metro projects, which is, I mean, opinions differ on, the kind of PPP in the Gulf region here. Some, because it costs money to borrow, but there's lots of money with the government. But money is not the only issue. Involving private sector in the development will help in creating a new culture towards diversification and involving the private sector in the future. So, good. I mean, so far the trends we're talking about, the environment, as Dr. Saleh mentioned, the integrated transport system, the procurement of projects. I'd like to invite the audience here, if anybody has a question you would like to raise and ask our panelists, please do so. No questions.
Dr. Saleh, maybe I can ask you a question. Do we have any sort of a master plan thought about, or at least some draft idea about having a master plan, so we can learn from the past and make sure we can do those things that we've done in the past with success or little success? So would it be advisable, or is any organization willing to come working on the major master plan from now forward?
I understand your question. Is there a master plan for Kuwait? Yeah, I mean, the first master plan of Kuwait was, I think, in 1951, if I am that early. Then they were updated many times, and I think right now the municipality, every so many years, they come up with something called updating the master plan, and there's definitely a transportation element. That transportation element, unfortunately, is being shrinked over the last few master plans. The previous master plan, I've noticed there was a lot of origin-destination studies within the master plan between all the even existing communities and futuristic communities. One thing I think is a source of good understanding of what mistakes we got into and how to get out of it is so obvious within the current highway network. Being a few times a member of the highest traffic council, it's called, which is really just an advising board, we suggested really to make a good inventory of the current highway network in Kuwait and make inventory of all the errors, expert errors and mistakes, or how to improve, how to raise the efficiency of the road to avoid all the mistakes. And I think that's a must. What I think of, how I think of, it's a must. This should be done to avoid further deterioration of the present network. I think there's many things, efforts went into correcting the previous mistakes. Unfortunately, these things are so difficult in highly urbanized, dense communities. Okay? there's not enough land to expand, then from the many upgrading, or what's called upgrading to the network, to reduce congestion, reduce interweaving of the different movements, I think what we did really just shifted the problem from one location to another. And a good example really was the extension of the Fifth Ring Road all the way to the Al-Bada roundabout. As I remember, before they start construction, there was a big meeting like this probably, and bigger between different people in Kuwait, different ministries. And these issues were brought up, but it was too late. The road was designed and they were about to go into construction. So I think that should be done right away and within the master plan, to review all this and avoid, and also to suggest what we can do. I think some big investment in really improving the current might be a good thing to do. I mean, to go either depressed or elevated those rings and bring the communities back together and separate the local from the long distance movements.
Any further questions?
Yes. I have one question. Do you think that the building regulations have significant impact on the highway system, especially in the last 10 or 15 years? We found high increment in the FAR, especially in the investment areas. For you, yes.
For me, yeah.
Yes.
One more time, if I...
do you think that the building regulations have significant impact on the highway system? Especially in the last 10, 15 years, we found high increment in the FAR.
Oh,
Especially in the investment
definitely
areas.
Land use, zoning, and all this regulation has a lot to do, it has a great effect on demand for transportation. And in Kuwait, when we say demand, we're talking about highway in general, okay? We're not talking about public transportation. Allowing people to have, one of the regulations were changed was you are allowed, or a house owner allowed to build 200% from the area. If you have 1,000 square meter lot, you are allowed to build net area of 2,000. Those issues definitely have a great effect on the demand for transportation and what's the effect on the traffic on the road. This is one of them. Yeah. Also, building some giant land uses, for example, the university, the stadium, many other things. These should be all built up in the master plan, I think, these issues, regulation, and should be respected, really, if it was done carefully.
One final question before we end the session.
This question is for engineering. I want to ask about the durability to increase the lifetime of the structures in Kuwait instead of rehabilitation, spending more time, more money on it.
Okay, thanks, Ahmed. Actually, I think this opportunity, just before answering the question directly, is, I think, Javed, what you mentioned a bit earlier about the master plan, and that I think you were alluding to lessons learned, which is what Dr. Saleh picked up on. And when I was looking at projects that are upcoming, one of the projects that's going to be implemented is the rehabilitation. It's a long process, starting by inspection, rehabilitation, and maintenance of all the existing stock of roads. But what caught my attention more than anything else is that one of the key deliverables was an update to the bridge inspection manual. And I think that's fundamental. This is exactly what the lessons learned would be. Now from that, Ahmed, then what would be the biggest lesson to be learned is that, and it goes back, actually it's related to what I said earlier about not simply constructing for the end of the contract, but looking at the lifespan of the structure. Big bridges in this part of the world are designed for 100 years. Now this is one of the most aggressive environments in the world, and making structures, reinforced concrete, conventional structures last for 100 years is a very, very big task. And the key, again, is engaging contractors at early days, but also perhaps educating the client that even if the initial costs are slightly more than what they had anticipated, that will bring a lot of value to the project if they do want their bridge to live for 100 years. Measures could be a number of things, technically. I am a firm believer that instead of using special materials and additives and special precautions, a proper design, a very well done design, for example, by eliminating members that could be susceptible to damage, such as bearings and expansion joints, and looking after the design, the details of the design, is the key to start as a starting point for the durability of the structures. Of course, other measures could be done, and I'm not sure, Nidal, if you're going to talk a bit later about durability of bridges or not, but
yeah, there will be a session
there will,
later.
So I'm not going to hijack that talk from now, but the key answer is that it starts by the client understanding what a durable design is, and the consultant or the designers actually implementing that.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting discussions. This will bring us to the end of this session. So if you'd like to show your appreciation to both panelists and the traditional manner. Thank you very much.